welcome to Research Talk. I hope you are enjoying our journey together on qualitative research. In our previous videos, we talked about first cycle of coding methods. We talked about descriptive coding, process coding, and emotion coding versus coding, and all these different ways of coding the data. And that collectively is called first cycle of coding. Now we are going to move to the second cycle of coding. But before we do that, I wanted to talk about some of the transition related methods that one should keep in mind when you are transitioning from first cycle of coding to second cycle of coding. So let's say first cycle coding methods and second cycle of coding methods. But before we start second cycle of coding the data, there are certain things that I recommend you all to do. And one of the key recommendations related to the transition is create a table of all the first cycle codes. So create a table where you put maybe 3 columns. Column number 1 is like the numbering, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then in the second column is the code that you have done in the first cycle. And then the third column could be the description of those codes, so sort of a definition of those codes. So create a table of all the first cycle codes. And the purpose, the reason why we do that, because we want to look at all the codes we have generated in the first cycle of coding. And then we want to look at those codes and see generally what happens in the first cycle of codes. We have a large number of codes. So generally it might be somewhere between 50 codes to maybe 100 codes. Now, having a large number of codes is a little difficult to see the pattern. So what we do, we try to look at all these codes, first cycle codes, and see if some codes can be merged together. And that's what we do after we create a table of all the first cycle codes. We go through the codes and ask ourselves, are there codes which can be merged together but because they are similar in what we want to understand or what we want to highlight? So that's what we do. We create a table of all the codes and then we try to merge the codes which refer to similar ideas or similar analytic thought. So that's one thing we do before we start our second cycle of coding. Another important thing that we do is, I highly recommend this, and I call it peer discussion. So after you are done with your first cycle coding, I highly recommend that you sit with your colleague or a peer, a friend, and discuss about the study, the coding process, and what is emerging out of the code, out of the first cycle of analysis. And this process is very powerful in the sense that the mere act of discussing, the mere act of engaging in a dialogue with a friend who is just, asking you some questions, asking you to talk in detail and maybe challenging you to think about those codes maybe from a different perspective. And by engaging in a discussion as a researcher, you start developing insights, you start developing ideas about how these codes might come together or maybe merge together, or they can be related in a way that helps you to understand in a deeper way. So a peer discussion is another important process that I recommend to all the researcher. If you are working in a research team, obviously after the first cycle of coding, you can sit with your research team and you can discuss about your own perception of the codes which are emerging, your own take, your own feelings, your own way of looking at the data, and sharing with the team members and engaging in a dialogue, in a discussion, helps you to develop more insights about the data. If you are a doctoral student, and I do it all the time with the student I advise or I mentor, after they are done with their first cycle of coding, I ask them to come to me, and then I engage them in a conversation where I challenge them. I ask them to share their experience about the coding, the data which is emerging from the first cycle of analysis. And this process, the student have reported many times to me that this is a very powerful process, because after engaging in a dialogue where they are being challenged to think, to process about what is emerging from the data, it helps them to think deeper and develop more insights about the data. So that's what I highly recommend to do after you are done with your first cycle of coding and before you start the second cycle of coding. Third and very important thing is your memo, analytic memo that we write. Now, memos, you already know, are a researcher's reflection about the data, about the codes, about the patterns that you identify in your data when you are doing the analysis. So memos are a reflection of a researcher. We will talk more about it in the next video when I'll explain how a memo looks like and how you organize and write your memo. But here, just understand that memoing is a very important process that needs to be followed when you are doing the first cycle of coding and when you are trying to transition to the second cycle of coding. So during transition, it's very important for a researcher to write a memo about their thoughts, their feelings, their overall experience about the codes, the patterns they are noticing in the data, and summarizing those insights about the data in your memo. So these are the three things which are very, very important when it comes to transitioning from first cycle coding to the second cycle coding. So once you have finished your first cycle of codes, engage in all these three recommendations before you start your second cycle of coding. So as I said previously, I recommend to create a table of all the codes that you have generated in the first cycle. So let me let me open my computer and demonstrate with an example how does it look like, and then it will be more useful. I mean, you'll be able to more relate to how this process looks like in practical. All right, so on my screen you could see this is a study where the researcher explored a role of extracurricular activities in developing leadership skills, and the target population is high school students. And you could see the guiding research question, which is, what role do extracurricular activities play in developing leadership skills among high school students? Talking about data collection method, the researcher used focus group discussions to understand and explore their experiences related to leadership. And they also did observations. So there are two types of data you could see: observation of extracurricular sessions and interviews with activity coordinator also. So they have interviews with activity coordinator, observation of the extracurricular sessions, and they also did a focus group discussion with these high school students to collect the data. And as you could see there, this is the list of the initial coding of the data, which included focus group interviews, observation data, and interviews of the activity coordinator. So this is the initial list of codes. You could see on the left side the code number, initial codes, and a brief description about the definition of that code. So, and initial coding means the researcher has done coding all the transcripts, all the interviews, all the observations, and they came up with, let's see, 35 codes, and these are initial codes. Another thing you might notice here that some codes are, most of the codes you see here, they are uh, descriptive codes, like the noun phrases. If you remember when we talked about the initial coding method, so you see leadership opportunities, teamwork, and collaboration. They are more sort of noun phrases and sort of description. And some codes you will notice here are process codes. So let's look at the code number here, 21, ethical decision making. This is a process code, and you know why it is a process code, because it's a gerund, it shows the action, the ing. So that's a process code. Let's keep looking at, let's look at 26, creative problem solving. So this code is about innovative approaches to solving problems encountered in activities. So the code is a process code because, again, the ing gerund, creative problem solving. Networking, this 31 code, building of professional and personal connections. So this is also a process code because it's a gerund. So this initial coding is a combination of descriptive codes as well as process codes. And there are 35 initial codes. So what the researcher has done is he has created this table with the code number, the code, and a brief description of uh, the code. So as you remember what we do, we first create a list of our initial codes. And before we transition to the second cycle of coding, we'll look at all these codes and try to understand, can we merge codes which are similar in nature? And this will help you to categorize. Maybe you can come up with less now, categories of codes which sort of talk about similar construct, similar concept. So that's the idea. And another reason is minimizing the number of codes will help researcher to manage the data more effectively, because 35 codes are too much to handle before you move to the second cycle of coding. So let's do that. So let me start with looking at all these codes and how, and I will upload this file in the description of the video, so that if you want to come back and have a look at it, you can do it later. So let's start with that. So the first code, you see leadership opportunities. And let's look at code number 15, which says leadership styles. So the first code is leadership opportunities. Code number 15 is leadership styles, which talks about various styles of leadership that which is being observed and practiced by students. And let's look at code number 27 here, which is peer leadership. Leadership exerted among peers through example and prompt support. So these three codes, 27 peer leadership, code number 15 leadership styles, and code number 1 leadership opportunities, can be clubbed together. And based on the description, we can code these three codes together as we can recode this as leadership development. And we can do that because these three codes sort of relate to the various facets of leadership development. Develop. So, code number 1 and 15, let me put it here. Code number 1 plus 15 plus 27 can be recoded as leadership development. So these three codes become one code. So that's what I meant when I say you can merge the codes based on the similarities of the construct uh, that that they are uh, that they are offering. Now let's keep doing that and let's look at some more codes and see if we can merge some of the codes which in some way are related or uh, similar in terms of what they are describing. Let's look at code number 2. It says team work and collaboration. Okay. And code number 9 here, which says conflict resolution. Teamwork and collaboration. And code number 9, conflict resolution. Now, these two codes encompass aspects of how students work together, resolve disputes, and achieve common goals within teams. So we can merge these two code number 2, teamwork and collaboration, and code number 9, conflict resolution, and we can recode it as uh, team dynamics because that's what both the codes are referring to. So let me do that. So code number 2 plus code number 9, and we can recode these two as team dynamics. Let me take another example here. Let's look at code number 6 here. So let's go up. Code number 6, mentorship and guidance, which describes influence and advice from coaches, teachers, and older students. So code number 6. And let's look at code number 18 down here, which says role models here, which describes influence of admired individuals within and outside the activity. And let's look at code number 33 here, which is family involvement. Family involvement, the support and role of family in facilitating participation. So these three codes, mentorship and guidance, role models, and family involvement, can be merged together as support systems because these three codes are related to the various sources of support and guidance that students receive from mentors to family members, right? So let's do that too. So code number 6 plus code number 18 plus code number 33, which is family involvement, and we can recode that as support systems. So you see what I'm doing here. I made a list of all the codes that I created and generated from the first cycle of coding. And then I'm looking at these codes and try to understand if there are codes which kind of talk about similar ideas and can we club it together. And when you club it together, you can use an umbrella term that include all these codes, that include what is being discussed, all these codes. So you can use this technique of merging codes to minimize the number of codes. And generally, it happens when you start your first cycle of coding generates many codes. Generally, these codes are somewhere between 20 to 50, or maybe, depending on the study, it might be 70 or 100. Now, managing a large number of codes obviously is not easy. So this is our second process before we jump to the second cycle of coding to merge some of the codes. So let's say there are 35 codes in total here, and after merging, I may come up with 20 codes, for instance. And then I will use these 20 codes for the second cycle of coding process. So that's what I suggest you all to do, to make a list of all the codes, initial codes, and uh, find out ways to merge them. You don't have to merge all the codes. Maybe some codes, they are so independent in terms of the idea they are describing that they cannot be merged with anything, and that's fine. You don't have to merge all the codes. So the idea is minimizing the number of codes based on the similarity. So if you got with 30 codes, you can minimize it to 20 codes, and that become more manageable before you start second cycle of coding. I hope this demonstration helped you understand the process that I was explaining. And if you got any questions, you can put in the comment and I'll get back to you. Thank you, and I'll see you soon. Bye.